So, Rabbi Platcow and I are delighted to welcome everyone to our semester of learning. This Gemara shiur or Talmud study will be focused on stories from the boundary of life and death. So, we're going to be looking at passages from the Talmud and also related passages from traditional Jewish literature, rabbinic literature specifically, but you can't study the rabbinic literature without drawing heavily on Torah. The earliest stratum of Jewish wisdom is, of course, the tree of life. So we'll make many references, of course, to verses from Torah and Tanakh and whole passages. And occasionally, I know we will digress into other related sacred literature. But our core study will be Gemara, which is the Aramaic way in which we refer to the study of the Talmud, chiefly the Babylonian Talmud. Of the two Talmuds, the Babylonian and the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi, sometimes called the Palestinian Talmud, having nothing to do with Palestinian people, but rather with the territory that the Romans called Palestina or Palestine, which is where it comes from the Galilee. By far the more celebrated, the larger, the more widely, I think, studied and embraced as one of the chief streams of Jewish wisdom is the Babylonian Talmud, from the great exilic community of Jews living in Babylonia, today Iraq, between the first and the 8th or ninth centuries of the Common Era, when the Talmud was composed and compiled. If you ever forget any of the background, which I've given a number of times before, you can ask me privately. You can put questions of any kind in the chat window. You can raise a hand. I prefer that you raise a hand digitally. So using the tools on Zoom, use the React tool at the bottom. It looks like a little lopsided heart. And then you can call up a window from there that suggests that you can raise your hand. That's a great way of wanting to be acknowledged. We'll do our best to acknowledge everyone, but of course, sometimes we just have to move on to study. So we're going to be looking at Talmud passages that explore the journey of human life and Jewish life specifically on the boundary of life and death. And that will be the through line for our fall study. I hope that you will find it both spiritually uplifting, pragmatically useful, and that it will comment in meaningful ways on our lives. And part of what makes this class so rich and enjoyable, and at times emotionally, full and sometimes challenging, is the fact that this adventure through text is also a journey into our lives and the things that matter. So I think we'll find that even in today's subject. So without any delay, I want to proceed to the first text that we've selected for today's class. And I would say, we do have a lesson plan, though it is more, it's a concept of a plan each week. So we don't mind deviating a little bit, and we certainly don't mind if we don't get to everything, because then we can just return to it next week. And we get done what we get done. It's more important that we have a good study than that we cover, a prescribed amount of material, though, again, I'm often the one to try and move things forward when we are in the middle of a rich discussion that sometimes goes down a rabbit hole. So I want to highlight a passage first from Mishnah. Mishnah, you may recall, is the core compilation of rabbinic teaching, approximately representing 3 or 4 centuries of accumulated Jewish wisdom, compiled, redacted somewhere in the first few decades of the 3rd century of the Common Era, under the direction of one of the great rabbis, certainly the greatest rabbi of his generation, Rabbi Yehuda ha-Nasi, or Judah the Prince. He wasn't actual royalty, but he was also, in addition to being the preeminent scholar of his time, Yehuda Nasi was also a Nasi, which was the designated official in the Jewish community to interface with the Roman government, so with the authorities. So he also was, in a sense, an ambassador or diplomat for the Jewish people. And his chief intellectual project was to compile the largest at the time code of Jewish thought. I don't call it a code of law because it is so much more. It is primarily halachic in orientation. In other words, it's a lot of what we do and how with a little bit of why, whereas the Talmud is a lot of what we do, how with a lot of why, and then a lot of digressions. The Mishnah is, you can think of it as if you slice an onion to look at its cross section. If the Torah is the innermost ring, the Mishnah is the very next ring around it. It intends to take all of the accumulated teaching of the Torah that is applicable to how to live a life that is Jewish, a Jewish life, as the rabbis defined it in the early period of the early rabbinic period, the first couple centuries of the Common Era, and systematize it and thematize it along certain topics. So we're going to look at a section of Mishnah that comes from the order known as Moed, which means seasons. So it again, the overarching theme is all of the times of the Jewish calendar that matter. And this comes from tractate Yoma, which is the Aramaic word for Hayom, in Hebrew, the day. The day in the rabbinic world was Yom Kippur. So as if you didn't even need Kippur, just say Yoma, the day. Oh, everyone knows, the big day. And I just want to start with a little bit of wisdom from Yoma, because if we are going to explore the boundary of life and death throughout our fall study, it is important that we have some key understandings of life in the rabbinic tradition. And so I'm not going to read this whole passage, but this is Mishnah Yoma, chapter 8, Mishnah number 6. And I'm using Sefaria, this wonderful online resource that is open access. And, occasionally I'll just point out how to use it on your own, because one of our goals as teachers is to empower members of our community to use these tools without rabbinic supervision. This is probably familiar to you, and I just wanted to highlight it. So the passage that we're going to look at follows on the heels of, excuse me, this Mishnah. In the case of one who was seized with life-threatening illness called bulmos, a Greek loanword, by the way, that is the same root as the disorder known as bulimia. So bulmos was some kind of wasting disease or something having to do with hunger. Nobody knows exactly medically what it represents in today's medical lexicon. It is not a psychiatric disorder like bulimia that involves binging and purging. But you can see that the gloss here, Steinsaltz, who gives the interpolated text that is not italicized, that not boldface, that means it's actually just an interpolation, causing unbearable hunger pangs and impaired vision. So the idea here is that one may, excuse me, feed him on Yom Kippur until he recovers. And they go on with these other specific conditions. The point being, and I think you know this, that if there is any doubt whatsoever that a person's life may be in jeopardy, that a person's health might be severely, hurt or one's condition might be exacerbated by fasting, then you don't fast. And as you can see, the kind of summary line at the bottom, a case of uncertainty concerning a life-threatening situation overrides Shabbat. And Yom Kippur is also a Shabbat. It's actually a big Shabbat. It observes all of the same restrictions as a Sabbath, plus many, many more. So the point here is one that we actually know, because when I announced at the end of Yom Kippur services, both on Kol Nidre and the day of Yom Kippur, about fasting, it's my practice to remind the community that Judaism certainly encourages the refraining from food and drink on the Day of Atonement, but it does not advise doing so in a way that could in any way jeopardize your life or health, right? So life and health come first. And I think that's the point I'd like to extract as the kind of preamble to our study today. Based on a teaching that is familiar just because I was saying it on the Bima a week ago. Your health comes first. Your life comes first. And any ritual observance or restriction comes second, right? So even Shabbat, which again, it's a little bit I think it's important for us to recognize that the premise of Jewish practice is that Shabbat is an overriding consideration, must be observed. It's one of the highest mitzvot in terms of its prominence and importance in the Jewish tradition. We may not live in quite such a strict relationship with Shabbat, but that's certainly the way in which the tradition considers it. But it doesn't override your life, right? And so with that in mind, let's read the first text that I've actually selected for study today. Um, and I'm going to start in the Hebrew as I usually do, but liberally consult the English. So from Mishnah Yoma, chapter 8, verse 7. And then we'll look at an elaboration of this in the Talmud. Misha nafla alav mapolet. So a person upon whom there fell like a rock slide. Misha nafla alav mapolet, safek hu sham, safek eno sham. And you don't know whether that person is actually under the debris or not. So in other words, there was so much matter falling that it has created a pile, and you don't know if there's a living body anywhere in that pile. And I want to just highlight this word here, which is a key word for the rabbis and for Jewish law. Safek means doubt or uncertainty. So much rabbinic law in Mishnah and Talmud parses how to deal with cases where there is uncertainty, right? Where something, well, we don't know, is the person under there or not? So, safek husham, safek enosham. There is doubt whether or not the person may be there, uncertainty as to whether or not there's a person under there. Safek chai, safek mate. And to get even more clear, suppose you know there's a person in there, but it is uncertain whether he is chai, alive, safek mate, or dead, right? And then it goes on to a third condition, which, again, be prepared to be emotionally stretched here, maybe a little bit of discomfort. Safek nochri, safek Yisrael. It is uncertain whether the person under there is a Gentile. The word nochri is Gentile. Safek Yisrael, a Jew. All right, so we have three conditions set up. A rock slide falls on a person. We don't know whether there's actually a person there or not. One. Two, we don't know whether the person who is there is alive or dead. Three, assuming alive, we don't know whether the person there is Gentile or Jew. All right, what do we do? Mifakachin alav et hagal. All right, so this is the key point. Regardless of the uncertainty, you have to clear the pile away. Mifakachin alav et hagal. Hagal is a pile. So you have to clear the pile away regardless of what your level of certainty is about the condition of the person underneath, whether or not there's a person, if the person is alive or dead, if the person is Jewish or Gentile. Okay? Mitza'uhu chai. All right, so in this case, if you find that he's alive, mifakachin alav, then you have to keep removing the stones. V'imet yanichuhu. All right, you should leave the pile there. Now, really? You would leave a dead body just lying out there? The presupposed condition here is that it's on Shabbat. All right, it's on the Sabbath. Sorry, my hand is raised. That was unintentional. I have motion detection on, so if I do this, it thinks that I have a question. So really important to understand that the Mishnah here is suggesting that if there is even a remote chance that a person might be alive, trapped under a pile of rocks and rubble, the imperative Jewishly is to save him even on Shabbat, right? So life, again, another illustration of how life overrides Shabbat, and it does not matter whether the person is Jewish or Gentile. Again, as modern Jews, Reform Jews, however we consider ourselves, living in America or wherever we may find ourselves in the 21st century, we may say, well, this is intuitively obvious. You wouldn't choose not to save a life just because it's the Sabbath. But I want you to understand that this cultural norm is established in writing very early on in the rabbinic literature. Right? So don't conclude that just because Shabbat over and over and over again in the Torah is emphasized as a spiritual imperative, that it somehow overrides what we call pikuach nefesh, which means the value of saving a life or preserving a life. Okay, we'll take a comment here and then we'll look at a little corresponding passage of the Gemara. Mom and Dad.
With all that being said, where does whether or not this poor unfortunate is a Jew have anything to do with saving his life?
Yeah, right. So let's just sort of take it at face value and say it very much appears to me, and I make no apology, excuse, or further explanation for it, that there is an implied Jewish chauvinism going on here, right? Even the fact that the Talmud has to raise it implies that there's a chauvinistic outlook here. Having said that, it may simply be that the rabbis want to make sure that the common people understand that we do not discriminate when it comes to life and health. And unfortunately, you may think that this is so obvious that we wouldn't have to say it, but it actually does need to be said. And I said it on Yom Kippur morning. We're actually living in a time where this has roiled the medical community in Israel when it comes to do we treat malnourished or injured Palestinian children, right? This text would actually suggest, I mean, let's really get to cases where there are bodies lying under rubble. You don't need to imagine this. You just need to look online. This is happening. It's happening in Gaza every day, right? And so then the question is it even relevant that the children buried under rubble in Gaza whose lives may be saved are not Jewish? This text alone would suggest that shouldn't even be part of the discussion. However, as usual, the Babylonian Talmud will muddy the waters before it makes them clear. And we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because we have one large text that Rabbi Platcow brings to our study this morning that will be the heart of our discussion. Though I should warn all of you, and especially my esteemed colleague, that I'm a terrible interrupter. I'm going to do my best, but I will try to hold my tongue and still reserve the right to interrupt for the sake of learning. Okay. So let's just take a look at how the Babylonian Talmud parses this. And I want you to see that what we're looking at here is the corresponding Gemara to the Mishnah we just read. So in Mishnah, this is Yoma chapter 8, Mishnah 7. In Gemara, this is 85a of Yoma. So I don't know if you can see it up there. The print's a little small. I had to reduce it so you could see it, but there we go. In the Gemara, we're looking at Tractate Yoma. So it's the corresponding Talmudic tractate, page 85. And those of us who are familiar with Talmud know that every page of Talmud has an A side and a B side. That has to do with the way folios were printed in the Middle Ages. So it just had to do with techniques of bookmaking and bookbinding. Okay, so here the Gemara takes up line by line the Mishnah we've just studied. And so here is the first line of said Mishnah, Misha nafla alav mapolet v'chule, which means a person upon whom there fell a rock slide, etc. V'chule just means and so forth and so on, right? And then my ka'amar. All right, so my ka'amar is Aramaic, means what does this actually say? What are we actually talking about here? Now, amazingly, you can see our buddy Adin Steinsaltz, may his memory be for a blessing, elaborates quite extensively. Once again, anything in the boldface is what the text actually says. Anything in plain type is what Steinsaltz wants us to know. It was taught in a Mishnah with regard to one upon whom a rock slide fell, and then he gives us the rest of it. And there is uncertainty whether he is there under the debris, whether he's not there, whether alive or dead, whether Gentile or Jew. One clears the pile from atop him. So thank you, Adin Steinsaltz. If you didn't have the Mishnah in front of you, he did the chule, the etc. part. He went back for us and gave us all of the information you need. The Gemara then asks, what is the Mishnah actually saying? Why does it bring three different uncertainties to illustrate the principle that one violates Shabbat to save a life, even in a case where you're not sure whether alive or dead, Gentile or Jew, or even there's a body there? And we're just going to skip to the English. The Gemara explains it is speaking using the style of needless to say. So in other words, Steinsaltz is elucidating for us through what the Gemara is actually teaching. It's like, we shouldn't have to tell you this, but we do. Needless to say, in a case where it is uncertain whether he is there or not there, one removes the debris. Since if he is there and he is alive, one must clear the debris. In other words, you have to assume that an opportunity is placed before you to save a life. But even if it is uncertain whether he is alive or dead, one must clear the debris. And needless to say, at least up until the point, as we read, where you've realized, oh, dead body here, I'm not going to do any more Sabbath violating work because there is no life to save. All right, that is also evident from the Mishnah. And needless to say, when there is uncertainty whether he's alive or dead, but it is certain that he's a Jew, one must clear the debris. Okay, that's self-evident because we look out for our own, but the point of the Gemara here is that no, even if there's uncertainty, you have to clear. And it goes on from here. And this is the final passage that I wanted to share before I hand over the room to Rabbi Platcow. So we know this. If they found him alive, they continue to remove the debris. And the Gemara is surprised at this. If they find him alive, it's obvious that they remove the debris, since that is saving a life. Well, of course. The Gemara says no. It is necessary to teach that one must desecrate Shabbat for his sake, even if it is clear that he will live only a short while and will die soon after. So this is the additional piece that you get when you study the Babylonian Talmud that the Mishnah itself does not cover. And you can think of Gemara in this relationship with Mishnah as the Mishnah elaborates at quite some length on all of the rules and regulations for living a Jewish life that the Torah sometimes says outright, often just hints at, and often doesn't say at all. But the Torah is the template for Mishnah. And what the Gemara does to the Mishnah is it imagines all of the permutations and various circumstances that come into play that the Mishnah may raise and that the Mishnah may not raise. So the Mishnah says, if he's alive, save the life. But the Mishnah does not say, how alive does the person need to be? Right? So this is really the direct segue to the passage we're going to study with Rabbi Platcow. What do we do in the case where we know that the life that is before us is not much of a life for long? We sometimes poetically at WRT, when we're talking about people in our community who have apprised us of a medical condition that means that they have a terminal illness or they are about to enter hospice care, usually politely we will say among the clergy team, we just found out that so-and-so is not long for the world. I just always find that it's a nice way of talking about somebody who is still very much alive, but not so very much alive that they're going to last very long. And then there are all sorts of permutations on that theme too. And what we're really going to spend our time thinking about today and possibly into weeks to come is, well, now that we're talking about somebody on the boundary of life and death, how does Judaism teach the person who is alive but not for long, or alive but suffering greatly, or alive but aware that the end is near? All of these variations on a theme. The obvious statement that it's not so obvious, but what now is obvious to us is that the Gemara wants us to treat that person no differently than if they were, awake, alert, standing up saying, "Hi, thanks for pulling the rocks off of me." This is a person who maybe is barely breathing. And what do we do in those cases? So I'm going to ask for any questions, thoughts before we transition texts and rabbis. Okay, Judy Gross, please.
This comes to mind. My elder sister-in-law, who's in very good shape, is asked to fill out DNR, do not resuscitate forms. And it's very complicated because there are certain situations. Does she want to have a tube inserted? Does she want to have certain medications? Does she just want to be left alone? And she wants to be there. Just to say, she's not taking, but seems part of that.
Absolutely. And we Jewish clergy are consulted on these matters all the time. And of course, you can have an arsenal of texts with which you are intimately familiar and still not have encountered every possible permutation. But we are often asked as rabbis or cantors, can you guide us on the Jewish ethics of signing a DNR or of placing a person on life support, or once on life support, of removing a person from life support. These are all questions that fall under the category of Jewish biomedical ethics, which will be very much a through line for our fall study. So, Rabbi Platcow, I think this is an appropriate moment to enter into the next of our texts.
Yes, absolutely. And thank you for that great introduction and segue. It's very clear that our text and our tradition really puts a mark of holiness on and sanctity on human life. And now we move to discussing a really rich and literary story on what does it mean to have a certain quality of life, and a bodily quality of life, not in terms of wealth or riches, but what does it mean when our the vessel of our body, and you'll see why I use that specific language, is giving out, and what do we do at that point? Okay, so the text that I'm bringing today is from Ketubot, and I learned a little piece of it with some of you last year, though not the whole story. And it is really a very special literary story in the middle of Ketubot, in the middle of our Talmud. And Ketubot is generally about the laws around marital relations and how does one get married? How do you enter into that covenantal relationship? Is it with God? Is it with just your spouse? What do we owe our spouses, and so on and so forth? And then somehow in the midst of it, we have this unbelievably beautiful story. So it starts out with this word. Yoma, we get to Yoma again, but it's not Yom Kippur this time. It's instead on this day, as in Hayom in Hebrew. And then it continues, Denach nafshe de Rabbi. And here it's a little confusing whether it's on the day that Rabbi died. And when we say Rabbi Yehuda ha-Nasi, you'll notice in the Steinsaltz, it says Yehuda ha-Nasi. We heard a little bit of an introduction about him earlier, but he was so famous that he need not be referred to by his entire name. Instead, just Rabbi would do. And it wasn't even that he was famous because of the work that he did with the Romans, but he was famous, or his way of being an ambassador to the Romans for the Jewish people, or the Israelites. But people came from all over to learn from him. He was a teacher, really a rabbi, even really a rabbi in his own right. And he was also known for being very rich and yet living extraordinarily modestly. He's also the first person, and this was something that I found and chuckled a little bit. He seems to be the first person to ever be quoted for saying, I've learned from my teachers, and I love my friends, and I've learned from my friends and my fellow students. But, and you hear all of the teachers in the room almost saying it for themselves, but I learned from my students most of all. And I see, Jane, you're nodding. It's something that you often say as well. So Rabbi is a macher, and you could even say that he's even more of a macher. And you might have remembered in our conversations about death practices last year that he is allegedly buried in Beit She'arim, not in the ground, but in a sarcophagus, which is very interesting. Okay, so that's enough about Rabbi. This story revolves around his life. Now it says that it's on the day that Rabbi died, but it was the morning. It was before he died that this happened.
Yeah, it's even like, just to get the Aramaic at the top, it's really interesting. It says Hahu Yoma, on that day, Dinach nafshe de Rabbi, which literally means they were seeking Rabbi's soul.
Yeah.
Right? Literally, the Aramaic means like his soul was being summoned. Like it was time to go. And it doesn't say who's doing the seeking, by the way. I mean, obviously, it is the hand of God, the hand of fate, the hand of life itself. But his soul is being sought. It's like time to come home.
Okay, so perfect. Thank you. So the rabbis can sense this. So they do what we would all do, right? They gazaru rabbanan ta'anita. They declare a fast. They decree a fast. Uvo rachame, and the text in the English says they begged for mercy. This word uvo in this case, but it comes from the Aramaic root bet yud ayin, is really a word for ask or need or want, and it's a very versatile one. So it kind of includes all of those things, and that's how you get the English word for begged on the left side of the page. So they're begging for mercy. They're begging for compassion, and they're begging for compassion for who is the question, and you'll answer that for yourself, perhaps. Ve'amri kol man da'amar, and they said, anyone who says nach nafshe de Rabbi, that Rabbi's soul is being summoned, or that in this case Rabbi has died. Yidaker becherev. May that person be stabbed with a sword. So pretty intense what's going on here. It seems like heaven is asking for Rabbi, and we'll see that beautifully said by another character in a moment. And Rabbi has not quite yet died, but it seems like the moment is nigh. And instead of accepting that, the rabbis say, you know what, anyone who says that this is the case, anyone who says that Rabbi has died, we're going to stab them. This is pretty intense lack of acceptance, and also violent in that way.
Yeah, it's very evocative of the great scene in Monty Python and the Holy Grail with the body that's been loaded onto the cart in the Black Plague in the first part of the movie. I'm not dead yet, right?
I love that.
Rabbis are insisting, not dead yet.
Right.
Don't even say it.
So what do we make of the rabbi's state before we continue on? What do we think of what's going on so far? Yeah, go ahead, Judy.
Well, instead of having compassion at this very, very sad time, they're denying the inevitable in a very cruel way. I don't know what's going on. It just seems that it's not rabbinic. It's not awful. It's violence. Demanding violence at this time is just, it seems the opposite of what is really needed. Is his soul is coming, and they know that he's ill, he's close. So it's a surprise to have that phrase there. It's shocking. Yes,
beautifully said. I also love that you raised the word compassion, because here the word rachme, or rachamim as we know it in the Hebrew, that's a word translated here as mercy, but it's often translated as compassion. And one of the ways to talk about death with dignity is compassionate dying. So it actually is almost ironic that they're begging for compassion almost for themselves in this kind of selfish way, because they love this person and they want this person to stick around. And honestly, I think perhaps all of us have been in that situation at one time or another. Sandy, go ahead.
Unmute, Sandy.
I think I didn't look at it that way. I just read it as a sign that they respected and loved this man so much, and they wouldn't want to give him a kanahara, so to speak. Or maybe that's the opposite. I don't know Yiddish. They wanted, it was a sign of their respect. Don't say he's dead if he has an ounce of life. We want him long as he is alive.
Yeah, I love that. I love that interpretation that we were maybe the violence is actually is actually some kind of extreme situation where that's not actually what they're going to do, which is what we hear from the rabbis of the Talmud about a lot of violence in our Tanakh. But it's actually to say, look, like, this person is so dear to us. Why would we say something before we could verify it to be true about that person? Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, we'll continue to the next piece. So that's really the zoom out of the story, and now we really zoom in. Now we're getting into the home of Rabbi. So Salika amte de Rabbi le igara amra. Okay, so the maidservant, the amte of Rabbi, she goes up to the roof and she says this beautiful thing. It's so poetic. Elyonim mivakshin et Rabbi. The upper realms, or the upper levels, the heavens, if you will, are asking for Rabbi. And you'll notice here the word mivakshin is used, mivakesh, instead of the word that we had before when we were talking about the begging for mercy, this want, need, desire Aramaic word, ask word. Instead, it's much more subdued. The heavens are asking for Rabbi. They're requesting Rabbi. V'hatachtonim mivakshim et Rabbi. And also the lower realms, the earth, the world, is requesting Rabbi. So we have this tension here between the upper realms and the lower realms. Yehi ratzon, may it be God's will. God isn't here exactly, but or nominally, but God's will is inferred. She yachofu tachtonim et ha'elyonim. That the tachtonim, the lower realm, win out or impose the will on the upper realm. Okay, so she prays that. She goes up to the roof. She prays that the lower realms, the realm that is begging for Rabbi to stick around, to win out over the heavens. Okay. Then, kevan dechaze kama zimne de'ayel levet ha-kisei v'chalatz tfilin umanach lahu v'kamitz ta'er. Okay, so now she sees something going on, and the word chaze is used here, which is also the word for chazon, this word for vision. So it's not just that she is watching, but there's something almost extraordinary happening here. But then she sees how many times he has to get up and go to the restroom, get up and go to the bathroom. And in this day and age, men, and especially religious men or men that were higher up, they wore tefillin at all times. They wore those two little boxes, one on the top of your head between your eyes and one on your bicep pointing toward your heart, that remind us of the commandments that we are obligated to perform, and also one of them being to specifically love God. Right? So he's wearing these tefillin all the time, but you can't wear them in the bathroom. So you take them off before you go to the restroom, and then you go to the restroom, you do whatever you need to do, you come back out, you put on your tefillin. Same thing with a talit. That's why you'll see outside of our restrooms at the synagogue, there are little hooks outside of the restroom to put your talit as you're going into the bathroom, and then to collect it on the way out. So she's seeing how he's taking them off and putting them back on, and then lehu v'kamitz ta'er, and how much suffering is involved in that. And we can picture it. each of us, first of all, each of us know what it's like to have the flu or to be sick. If you haven't experienced anything like that, wow, I hope that you never do. But each of us know what it means to like really need to get to the restroom and to make sure that we have that moment. And we also know what it means to suffer in that moment a little bit. Not quite in the same way that Rabbi is suffering, but to really, really immediately need that. So in every moment, he is painstakingly taking off his tefillin and then painstakingly putting it back on. And he has to do it so many times. Kama zimne. How many times he has to do it? Okay.
By the way, I just want to, I've read this text countless times. It's one that I deeply cherish. And every time I encounter a text, I usually find something that I hadn't noticed before. And just juxtaposition of the spiritual and the physical here is really pronounced. Just the way in which from a literary standpoint, I always assume that these passages are written with a deep intentionality, and they're not just, casually thrown together. And this idea that we want to show the suffering of a man who is deeply devoted to his Judaism. So you have the tefillin on and off and on and off, but whose body requires him to attend moment to moment to his physical needs. In other words, we would say in modern parlance, he has no quality of life.
Yeah.
Because his physical needs have completely overridden his ability to be a Jew.
I'm so glad that you said that. I'm so glad that you said that, especially because it is almost as if his spirituality and his ability to connect with God, right? In the tefillin, it says that you should love the Lord your God, right? We say that every single day, multiple times a day. And it's as if taking them off so many times is fraying his connection. It's as if, we all, well, I don't know if we do this anymore, but when you go into your car and you turn on the radio and you can barely hear, it's like he could hear it so clearly in his earlier days. And now at this point, it's really fuzzy. Every single time he takes it off, it gets fuzzier and fuzzier and fuzzier.
And just by the way, pragmatically, I mean, Alan, you're a regular tefillin wearer. It's not the kind of thing that takes 30 seconds to put on tefillin. It's a deliberate. So to do it multiple times, it's like really a pain.
Yeah, yeah. And if you want to, treat your ritual object with dignity, it takes some time to take it off too. Also one other literary thing that I wanted to point out is that we have this incredible piece here. It's gonna highlight it and kind of mess it up in a second, but I think it's worth it. We have this incredible piece that she says, Elyonim mivakshin et Rabbi, v'tachtonim mivakshin et Rabbi, and we have these parallel worlds set up. And where is she saying this? She's saying it on the roof of his house, somehow in the middle of these two worlds. She's somehow able to have a cross section of what it means to stand in between those two places. Okay, so she sees how he's suffering. She sees how he's going through this process, and then she does something amazing. Amra, she says. Okay, I'm going to stop highlighting it. I'm sorry.
I do this every single time. It's my biggest complaint about Safari is the highlighting. It messes up the display.
Yeah. It's challenging sometimes, but it's such an amazing. Safari is such an amazing gift to the world and gift to clergy specifically that it's hard to complain. Okay, so she says, Amra, Yehi ratzon she Yachofu Elyonim et hatachtonim. She changes her prayer around. She says, may it be God's will that the Elyonim, that the heavens, the upper realm, win out over the tachtonim, over the lower realm. Okay. So an amazing thing happens here. She sees something. She has this vision of what life is like for Rabbi, and then she changes her mind. We'll take any comments here. Yes, Deb.
Yes, I remember when we went through this passage when you taught your last series, and I remember thinking that the maidservant had an almost angelic role. And I thought it so odd that a lowly maidservant who may or may not even have been Jewish was given the role of an angel.
Yeah, gorgeous, gorgeous. And also it's interesting because perhaps only a maidservant in this real servant stature, only a maidservant would be able to see or be granted the intimacy that she was, in order to see how he needed to get up and go to the restroom and take off his tefillin and put them back on. Beautiful. Thank you. Go ahead, Judy.
This also shows how the aides, the people who work with our family members, and are the angels, and very much often at a funeral. They're being, thank you. You were there every moment. You were there when they had to go to the bathroom, when they woke up in the middle of the night. Those are the angels. It's very interesting that she is highlighted here, and how close she is to the rabbi.
Yeah, it's as if there's an element of intimacy needed almost to access that divinity, that ability to be there and to be that angel for someone. Gorgeous. Doug and Marge.
I think it's very compelling that the way in which this scene is described, it really humanizes someone so prominent that, Rabbi ha-Nasi, just known as Rabbi, that it actually brings us down and says, no matter your status or your wealth or your privilege, we are all made of the same protoplasm. Goes bad, and here, pardon us if we get a little graphic, but this guy is on the, is running back and forth to the bathroom all the time. This is your fate, prominent rabbi or not. This is what we are made of, and this is what can happen.
Right. We are all equal in death and at the DMV.
Nice. Yeah, I identify with this so profoundly. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've been counseling families who are, ushering a loved one between the lower realm and the upper realm. And sometimes that ordeal lasts days, weeks, months, even years. And just the grieving of the loved ones as they watch their dear one go through agony, physical, and often, by the way, it's not just the physical torment, which I think is emphasized here, but you can also intuit or infer from the passage the lack of dignity, which is what a lot of people are most afraid of for themselves and their loved ones on the boundary between life and death. That, that they'll be deprived of just the dignity of a death where they don't have to, suffer not only physical torment, but also shame and embarrassment. And this just lays it all bare. It's like, yeah, this is not an easy or particularly dignified way to go.
Yes. And there, it reminds you also of people who suffer from Alzheimer's and dementia as well, in some ways that we're also looking at our parents or grandparents and seeing that this is no longer exactly a dignified life. This person who was once so caring or so thoughtful or so intelligent or intellectual is no longer that same person. And in some ways, this story brings that to mind, and also in other ways. Rabbi, I mean, it's not talked about specifically, but because it's not talked about specifically, we can kind of infer that he's still there mentally. And in some ways, he, in being aware of what's going on for him in this moment, brings even a deeper level of lack of dignity. Yes.
Yeah,
Tell me your name again.
It's Jonathan.
Jonathan. Nice
Could you just scroll down? I can't see the words. It says, however, when she saw how many times we'd enter the Bible and the next and put them back on, and how he's suffering, she said, may it be the will of God that the upper world should be. Oh, so basically they're saying that it's better that the person didn't live anymore. Is that what that's saying?
Yes, so initially she prays the opposite. She says, Yehi ratzon she yachofu tachtonim et ha'elyonim, that the lower world should win out over the upper worlds. And then she sees the rabbi in such distress in these moments that she says, you know what? Actually, the upper world should win out.
Yeah. Better not to keep him alive, because what kind of a life is this?
Yeah.
So does this enter the world now? We're talking about modern times there of euthanasia or the hospice care, where we're saying that there's no quality of life anymore, and it's better that we end it. Is this what this segues into?
Yeah. So this is the proof text that is used in the responsa on death with dignity in order to advocate for it.
And there is a significant movement in Judaism, and this crosses denominations, by the way. You have Orthodox poskim, Orthodox halachic authorities who are weighing in, even as we teach today, on this issue. And I think over the last 25, 30 years, there has gathered a lot of steam behind a Jewishly informed movement to rethink what used to be called euthanasia, which is, not necessarily a bad word. It is a euphemism. It comes from the Greek. EU is always good, like a eulogy from EU logos, meaning good words that you say about somebody when they've died. Euthanasia, thanatos, is the Greek root that means death. So euthanasia literally means a good death. But I think the more common parlance these days is around compassionate care and death with dignity, and rethinking the halachic permissions and restrictions around how we allow a person who is suffering to die. And I think most of us are probably at least passingly familiar that Judaism doesn't allow euthanasia, but as with most things, that reduces the conversation to a point where it doesn't accurately reflect the conversation. So these days, you will find Orthodox, conservative, reform rabbis, poskim, authorities in Jewish law, Jewish biomedical ethics, who are taking up these questions very seriously. And as Rabbi Platcow said, this is often text number one in the conversation about what it means to die with dignity in a way that is holistically integrated with Jewish thought and practice.
Yeah, and also I highly recommend the documentary Last Flight Home that Rabbi Rachel Timoner and her siblings made. Rabbi Rachel Timoner is the senior rabbi at Congregation Beth Elohim, the largest synagogue in Brooklyn, and also a very prominent Reform synagogue. And she and her siblings made a documentary about what it was like to go through the death with dignity process for their father. It is an extraordinarily moving film, and also shows what it is like to be a rabbi for a family member in a way that is very intimate and very beautiful. Arlene, you had your hand up.
Yes, I did. On Yom Kippur morning, I got a phone call that my childhood friend had passed away. I had seen her about 2 weeks before that, and I knew she was suffering from cancer. And during that quick meeting that I had with her, because that's the only thing that the hospital would permit, the fact that I wasn't a family member, the family allowed me to see her. She told me she wanted to die. And I said to her, I know that you have a lot of pain, but whether you live or die is not your choice, honey. Just keep fighting. We all love you. But somehow or other, when I left, I felt that there was something else I should have said or done. And it just didn't come to me at the time. Any suggestions?
Well, I think that that situation is something that befalls all of us.
Yeah.
What is something that we could have said or could have done or could have asked? I think the asking is often something that we think about a lot. All of us who have had a loss in our lives, we wish not just moments after we leave them, but years and years after their death, that we could have asked them about their life or about their insights. In some ways, this is an extraordinarily universal human experience to have that. What Rabbi Blake talked about in the very beginning of our class, that like safek, that little bit of doubt that says in our hearts, oh, I wish I had said this. I wish I had asked this. So I don't know if I have any specific advice. Maybe Rabbi Blake being around and being a rabbi for much longer than I might, but I will say that all of us are in that boat with you. Perhaps not with this specific person, but with someone in our lives too.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So with that moment, and maybe perhaps in your friend's memory, Arlene, we keep going, and we keep learning. So this is even closer to so inside the home. She was outside of the home when she was doing this praying, the maidservant. Inside of the home, Villa havu shat ki Rabbanan mil miv a rachame. Okay, so the Rabbanan, the rabbis that are all crowded around Rabbi Yehuda ha-Nasi as he's on his deathbed, they all will not be quiet. They won't be quiet. And we have this verb again, the bet yud ayin. Here we see bet ayin yud. They're constantly begging for mercy. They're begging for compassion, and we know who they're begging for compassion for. Perhaps they want his suffering to end, and they want him to be suddenly revived and suddenly back to the vigor of his youth or the vigor of his middle age even. But they're also begging for mercy for themselves so that they can keep hold of their teacher. Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's a real ironic twist on what we mean when we talk about mercy or compassion. Like,
Totally.
whose mercy they may think the merciful thing here would be for God to keep their beloved, venerated, one in a lifetime teacher alive. Oh my God, we can't live without Rabbi. Like, please, please, please don't let him die. But is that really oriented toward the needs of the patient, the needs of the dying? Or is that about their own needs? And then, of course, I think you and I are both seeing it. And I don't, I don't demean or disparage these sages for wanting what they want. It's very human. I can't tell you how many times I've been in the presence of the dying where beloved family members are praying, please don't let this person die. And I have also been in the presence of the dying many, many times where family members are saying, please let this person die. And
Yeah.
which is compassion. And I think the ambiguity that fills the word rachame, this begging for mercy, is again one of the richest parts of this literature. Just sitting with that ambiguity of like, well, for whom is it compassionate to pray for a dying man to stay alive?
Right. Doug and Marge, go ahead.
I think it's kind of interesting to note, as I'm looking at it, that the sages have been replaced by the medical team in current parlance here. And
Yes.
there is just no question that although these questions have arisen for, millennia, what do we do with our dying loved one? but the playing field really changes almost, month by month, depending on what the latest in medicine is. So things that, I clearly remember within my own career in medicine, the time when I was in medical school, that, for instance, patients with metastatic cancer didn't get admitted to intensive care units because, after all, why? They were going to die of their cancer.
Wow.
Or why should we do this operation on this Down's child? Why should we correct a heart defect here, considering, what's going to happen? They're going to die young anyway. So I don't think that we can look at this divorced from the aspect of how things to prolong life have changed.
Yeah, absolutely. Judy, go ahead.
There was an episode on The Pit, this very a popular program where a brother and sister, their father was dying. She wouldn't let them, the doctor really wanted to let him go. And they saw him suffer, and the daughter wouldn't give the permission. Meanwhile, I think the patient had asked, had requested in the DNR not to resuscitate. And she just couldn't let it happen. And of course, with the episode going on, it was torturous. And the brother wanted to let go, she couldn't. And part of it was her own guilt, which wouldn't let him go. But it was a very strong scene to see, and you could imagine that happening in life. It's hard.
Yeah, it gets us back to that complicated verb baya or baya lahu. They want him, they're asking for him, they need him, right? They're begging for this rabbi to stay with them, to hold on. Okay, so they keep begging, they keep praying. Shakla kuza Shadia me igra, and then in the brackets we have la'ara. So the maidservant, she takes a jug, a kuza, and she goes up to the roof again, and she throws it off the roof to the ground. Okay, this is such an iconic moment and a turning point in the story. Ishtiku me rachame, and the sages were silent. Their mercy ceased. Their mercies were silent, literally.
Yeah, because they were interrupted. Like, what the hell is that?
Yeah, saying? Exactly. V'nach nafshe de Rabbi, and that was the moment that Rabbi died. So, going back to what you were saying, Doug, that the sages are taking the place of the medical team. My friends, based on this piece of Talmud, prayer works. Prayer was keeping this guy alive. And the maidservant, in making this action, prayer is keeping them alive, and that's prayer is keeping him alive, and that's amazing, and what a revelation it is, perhaps for us. We can talk about whether or not we believe it to be true today, but it is the action of the maidservant that changes the course of the story. It is her action that interferes with their prayer. And in that moment, his soul goes to the Elyonim. So she is in some way actualizing her prayer for herself, right? She in the end prayed that the upper realm win out over the lower realm. And so in this moment, she creates her prayer. She realizes her prayer. Go ahead, Doug and March.
In the medical context, she's the one that pulls the plug.
Yeah.
Oh, hello? Yeah, I just wanted to say, in 1993, my father ended up in the Rochelle Hospital, and he was put on a machine because he couldn't breathe. We went down and sat with him every day. He had said to me I was going to be the person, I guess, who took care of his decide what to do, his will, that he did not want to be alive. If he had to be disabled. I said, okay. I went to Russia and came back. And when I came back, my son said to me, no, Grandpa's on a machine. He said he didn't want that. So I went back to the hospital and I spoke with them and they said, oh no, he now wants to be on the machine. I said, okay. So every day we would go there, my husband and I, and sit with him. And every day, the only thing he could think about was getting ice because he couldn't swallow and his mouth was dry. And all he wanted was ice from the moment that we got there to the moment we left. And I kept hearing in my head over and over, I don't want to be like this when the time comes. And I just looked at my father and I said, we used to feed him ice. We will keep doing what you want. And then I thought, just in my heart and soul, I love him dearly, but I don't think that I can see him doing this to himself for even the next month or 3 weeks. May he find peace and someplace. It is a very difficult thing. 1993 was a long time away. But listening to this brought it back so clearly. And I was thinking that only for myself, it's very hard when you're a human being to decide what you think that you can do that will make the person happy. And sometimes you do walk away with guilt. Truthfully, I believe it's in the hands of the Creator. And the best you can do is love the person that you have with you and always miss them.
Thank you for sharing, and Aleva Shalom, may peace be upon your father. It is so special that you shared that, and also that you really put under a microscope for us those decisions in that moment. When I was growing up, I had a history teacher who shared with us when I was in high school about how her father had recently passed away, and when he was completely mentally sound, before he really became very, very ill, he decided that she had a conversation with him, and she said, well, what do you want? What's important to you in the last moments? And he said, really what I want is to be able to eat chocolate ice cream and watch football. And in those last moments, he was in front of the TV watching football. Everybody was around him, and his last meal was chocolate ice cream. And we have those conversations, God willing, long before we get to those moments, so that when we are in those moments, there is less of a burden on our loved ones, first of all, and less guilt on our loved ones, because they have some, it's hard to say that there's no guilt, but they have some grounding in what their family member wanted in those moments. And also those things that they said, unless they decide that they change their minds, which certainly also happens, they can't be argued with. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
I want to add here as well, just in my own lived experience, that one of the most significant changes that I've observed over the course of my rabbinate, which now extends a little more than 25 years, has been the acceptance of palliative and hospice care at the end of life. I think it's one of the most important developments for treating patients who are dying. I think although it originated in England in the 1950s, hospice care took a very long time to gain public acceptance, and that's largely because, with totally good intentions, the medical community, at least in the West, was almost exclusively focused on matters of addressing health and keeping people alive, and almost, even if it wasn't put this way, viewed the dying of a patient as a kind of failure. And a lot of the ways in which that has shaped the outlook in Western medicine are explored in a book that I've recommended more times than I can count, which is called Being Mortal
Yes.
by Atul Gawande, the surgeon and author whose work is often featured in periodicals like The New Yorker. It's a really important book, I think, for anyone who's grappling with end-of-life issues for yourself, for a loved one, or just wants to explore more. He talks a lot about how Western medicine continues to think about the care for patients as kind of let's fix problems, let's prevent death for as long as we can, as opposed to a more integrated way of thinking about, well, what is the quality of this human being's life and how can we center that person's lived experience as a human being who is dying, who is going to die, which is probably the truest thing we can say about any one of us. How do we manage and work our way through this? And so, in this case, the fact that these sages, quote unquote, have so very much to learn from a humble maidservant is another one of the rich ironies that I'm sure is an intentional part of this literature. And again, every time I read this, it just sings out with more clarity because it really is so true to the psychodynamics of living and dying that come up on the boundary between life and death.
Yes, and I love that you said that they have so much to learn from the maidservant, because if you look at the format of the story, it's very clear that it's in the chiastic form, and and if you see that in a literary lens, it is very obvious that the maidservant is the hero here.
Yeah. Chiasm, by the way, is a literary device that kind of, if you're mapping it in an outline, it's A, B, C, C, B, A.
Yeah.
Right? It's plotted in such a way where the maidservant is at the center of the story, and it is her decision that changes everything. But she
Right.
also has to take a journey of recognizing that the right thing to do in that moment is to, as my dad said, pull the plug, right? Or throw the jug. Throw the jug and pull the
Jug,
plug.
pull the plug. That was great. That
We
was
have like
great.
1 minute left, so I'm gonna just
What's the name of that book?
the book is called Being Mortal by Atul Gawande, and we can put
Thank
it in
you.
the chat. I've also put a link to Last Flight Home. So I'm gonna first of all express my appreciation to you, Rabbi Platcow, for guiding us through one of, I think, the most, timeless texts from the Babylonian Talmud that sets an intention for the rest of our fall study. They won't all be, quite so heavy, but we're really going to explore um, Talmud from the boundary of life and death. And some cases it will be what happens before we die. In some cases, we'll look at stories from the hereafter as imagined by the rabbis. But of course, even the stories of the hereafter in the Talmudic tradition are really windows into what the rabbis think a life well lived looks like, right? So I think it is fair to say that all of these traditions arise out of a culture and a community that cherishes life and that puts life at the center of the Jewish religious experience, right? So, and if we didn't care about life, we wouldn't agonize and wrestle with what it means to live when dying is so imminent, right? So a lot of this is just keeps coming back to the fact that we're not focused on the moment after Rabbi dies. We're focused on what does it mean that he's still alive, but he is suffering. And I think that is, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's really Jewish. Okay, so we'll take two more comments and then I'll find a way to wrap us up. Joe, unmute, please.
The question I had was, what was the name of that book? We'll repeat it again.
I'll put it in the chat window. It is called I'm writing it as I say this, Being Mortal by Atul Gawande.
And if you're interested in audiobooks, he reads it himself. And so it's really quite engaging.
It is a must read. I'm telling you that is probably that and When Bad Things Happen to Good People by Harold Kushner, which was published, generations ago at this point, are two of still the most frequently recommended books that I give to members of our community. Thank you, Joe. Jonathan?
Are you going to cover Resurrection of the Dead?
Sure we are.
Okay.
Stick around. Many Jews are just absolutely shocked to find it enshrined in our sacred literature. And there's a story there too, because the rabbis simultaneously, while writing our tradition, were very, very mindful to distinguish Judaism from nascent Christianity. Christianity and rabbinic Judaism, the Judaism that really comes to life through and in the Talmud, are sibling traditions. It is often, I think, mistakenly communicated that Christianity is a daughter religion to Judaism. And in a sense, okay, yes, we had it first. We had the scripture, we had the Israelite Commonwealth. But most of what we understand about modern day Christianity derives from a milieu that is very parallel, similar to, and in some cases overlapping with the growth of rabbinic Judaism. So it should not surprise you, therefore, to find resurrection of the dead actually enshrined in Jewish thought. And yes, so thanks, Jonathan, for the teaser trailer there. Sandy, you want to get in the last word?
Oh, could you
I
unmute?
think that the servant, was more godly than the rabbis. And we don't have, and I won't keep us longer to expand on that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Friends, thank you for coming to study, for returning to study. Lots happening at the temple. Please, if you've signed up, the WRJ is sponsoring their Pizot, an Aramaic, and we've done a lot of Aramaic today. Kudos to Rabbi Platcow, who had a lot of tooth-breakingly difficult Aramaic to do. A lot of the Talmud is in Hebrew, but a lot of it's in Aramaic, and this entire
Good stuff.
this entire passage was Aramaic. And I was like, oh, better you than me, because the stuff I did from Mishnah was all Hebrew. We After tonight's Pizot dinner, which means a dinner of welcome around in sukkahs on Sukkot. Tomorrow evening services at 6:15 will feature Captain Nehemiah Danzig, who commanded troops in Gaza for the last 2 years, speaking about leadership, courage, humanity, and his experience. That will be followed by Spirits in the Sukkah at around 7:30, where we're tasting spirits from exotic lands, as well as wine and beer from exotic lands. So if you've never had an Iranian red or an Indian whiskey, now's your chance. It's going to be really fun. Or beer from Brazil. It's really going to be an interesting, fun, casual evening. Come make sure you have a good driving plan. It's tasting, not gulping. We're going to welcome you back to the temple on Sunday for our annual Sukkot block party at 11:30. Even if it rains, we'll move the festivities indoors, and including Create Day, which is a family-friendly, fun for all ages, hands-on activity led by our Men of Reformed Judaism and our congregant Jeff Simon. Tuesday, we do have family-friendly Simchat Torah festivities being celebrated at Scarsdale Synagogue in Fox Meadow, 5 p.m. on Monday, when the holiday begins on the Reform calendar. And then the rest of Diaspora Judaism observes Simchat Torah the evening of Tuesday, the 14th. We're going to have a brief Yizkor service at 6 o'clock, followed by a dinner, and then a wonderful performance with commentary by a string trio from the Israel Symphony Orchestra. It's going to be an amazing continuation of our Chag. So let us wish you Moadim L'Simcha. May this be a time of rejoicing, and may it be all the more joyful when our hostages come home. Please, God.
Who did you say that would be on Friday night? Somebody from Israel?
His name is Captain Nehemiah Danzig, Danzig. And he's really an exceptional public speaker who, after his tours of duty in Gaza, has been traveling throughout Jewish communities in diaspora to share a look at what he has experienced from his perspective. So it's going to be, challenging, not sensational or scary, but I think it will give us a window into what this war has looked like from the eyes of one who has led troops into battle.
Thank you.
I wish you all Moadim L'Simcha. Thank you. Okay.
Good luck about rabbis.
Thanks.
Thank
Steph.
you
Good to
both.
learn with you all.
Thank you both. It's wonderful.
Lovely to be with you.
Wonderful.
See you next
Yashikor,
week.
thank you.
More fun on Thursday the 16th. Bye.